Hello and welcome, weary podcast traveler. This is my viewfinder. I met Danny Luong building my first Perspectives art show. I don't remember how. Maybe through Alvin. I probably should have fact-checked that, but obviously it's too late for that now. Danny's main focus is maybe documentarian or journalistic. He uses different formats and subjects, but always seems to focus on his family lineage, stories of immigrants in this country, and the general experience of, at least right now, Asian Canadians. Through our chat, I kept hearing this Asian perspective in his thinking, and my head got stuck somewhere between concepts of Taoism and Zen Buddhism. For me, Zen Buddhism is a powerful spiritual influence that helps to moderate my own tendency to overcomplicate things. And by things, I mean everything. Separating itself from general religious and traditional Buddhist thoughts, Zen focuses on practice as a knowledge process. It's odd to Western thinking, I think, that spiritual enlightenment could arise from not thinking, but there's great power to the subsequent concept that instead of thinking about an action, one must simply be present and act. Even if by act we mean to sit and do nothing. Confusing? Danny brings up walking and meditation, and, at least in my reflection, seems to embody a lot of the practical ideas that circle around Zen Buddhism. Even if he's at odds with it, it's interesting that in acting in Zen, there's always a sense of conflict and a dialectic, because there's no single truth. Life is a balancing act between every living thing. Let's get to our chat, and after part 2, let me know if you think I'm onto something, or maybe if I should just get over myself and start taking some pictures again. Why don't we...
Do you want to do this in a typical kind of like interviewer kind of way, where you throw questions at me and you probe into it a little deeper, or you want to do it in more of a casual, like we're having a conversation about photography?
I do everything casually.
Me too.
I think... How about I tell you this? I don't know if I've told you this explicitly, but I bring you up a lot in this regard. So when Perspectives first started, before it was really called Perspectives, you were part of my inaugural, coffee shop show. And even putting that together, I just wanted to punch myself in the face by the end. Nothing to do with the artists. I thought you guys all, it was, fuck man, you, Louis, Scott, and Ingrid, it was dope. But... it's just a lot of work to coordinate and kind of build. And by the end of the opening, by the time we got to the opening, I already had questions about whether I should or should not continue doing this. I did all of that, in this really childish, naive sense, for the love of the game. And so it still came to fruition. But the thing that motivated me to keep going, Danny, to be honest with you, was when you brought all your friends and family, and I think it was your grandma, but watching you interact with your family and everybody being so happy to see your work on a wall is actually the only reason why I did the next show. Because at that point, and I bring you up the most because I think you brought the biggest crowd, and B, you had that interaction before anyone else did. I mean, everybody at the end had that, and it was motivating for me. But it was that family thing that I think is a big motivator, if not a motivator, like just a big part of you. So kind of with that in mind, just quickly, when did you start taking pictures?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question, right? Like, I feel like, you want to be taken seriously as a photographer, you got this like beautiful story about taking pictures or learning how to take pictures, right? Like people always come up to you and they give you, and like it's almost like the question, like, oh, like what got you started, right? Like what got you into it? And I mean, like, it's so many different things, right? Like I never picked up a camera until I was probably 16, and I only picked one up because my cousin got one and I wanted to get one, and they seemed pretty cool. So I got, a small little Canon XTI with a nifty 50, and I was like, yo, this thing's sick, and I had a lot of fun with it. And like, I wasn't doing anything serious, nor did I imagine that photography was ever going to be like a primary faucet in my life, right? Like at all. I bought a camera because my cousin bought one, and I wanted to get one too. I wanted to be cool like him, right? I looked up to him, so I did that. And I mean, like, my earliest experience with photography is and always has been, you know, and I still look through photographs from the Vietnam War. It's very, very, very obviously culturally connected to me. It's something I have studied most of my life and looked into, and like listened to the stories from my grandfather and my parents and parent and you know, a multitude of people that surround me. And I guess the thing that started to make me fall in love with it is like starting to see like the photography that came out of the Vietnam War and how much different that was than anything else that came before it. And even the Korean War, to an extent, had a lot of photographs that were akin to the Vietnam War, like just kind of shockingly brutal. And just right before America started clamping down on their press, you know what I mean? Being like, you know what, we can't actually release these images. Like, this is kind of crazy, you know? So that would be like my earliest interaction with photography as a serious medium. But my first time picking up a camera was, you know, 16, and I did the normal thing. Like, I went to LA, took pictures, you know, like took pictures of things that didn't matter. And I mean, arguably, like, you always take pictures of things that don't matter, right? So, like, they matter to you in some sense, or there was some sort of stimuli, but in the grand scheme of things, do these things matter? Probably not, and that's okay. But yeah, that would be the answer to my question. Like, I always, you know, you want to romanticize it a little bit and be like, oh yeah, you know, like, I picked up a camera and it was magical. But the biggest thing, I guess, what started to happen was early 20s, I would say. I'm 30 now, and I was going through a pretty severe bout of depression because I'd had several close friends commit suicide, and picking up a camera started to feel like, and I think, like, if you ask this question to every photographer you talk to, this is going to be a primary kind of note here, is like, it started to feel like I wasn't me. I wasn't Danny anymore. I could be, because like so much of living is linked to what you see and what you experience through your senses, right? And when you take the most primary sense that humans arguably have, which is sight, and you replace that by looking through a box, like, you don't have to be yourself anymore. You can just be the camera. And when you're the camera, you don't necessarily have to have feelings. Now, obviously, your biases and feelings do come through the lens, and I think that's what creates different flavors and obviously different types of photography, because there is a controller behind that camera. But when you get to be the camera, you don't necessarily have to have feelings. And that was really the allure to me for a long time, because I didn't want to feel anything anymore. I wanted a way out from being sad all the time, you know? So picking up the camera, I was able to just be a robot with a lens. It didn't have to be me. I didn't have to be the Danny in the world who was suffering because of X, Y, and Z. You know, it was just me looking through a viewfinder, and that was the closest I'd come to just achieving a state of nirvana, like a bliss. You know, because it didn't have to be myself. And it's almost meditative in that sense.
It's interesting. I mean, so I guess the first thought I have is I think that the idea of the relationship between a photographer, the tool of the camera, and then the display of the image, be it, you know, digital, print, proclaimed as a commodity, etc. Those are very complex relationships. Ones that I'm actually fundamentally interested in. And I think listening to you describe it as a sense of detachment, separation. I mean, I'm not sure, Danny, that you can make the assumption that everybody connects at that level. And I think if you have a peer group let's say at the camera store or wherever your photography community is, and people are describing it that way, that's one thing. But I might challenge the idea that taking a photograph is without emotion in general, because I don't know yet what motivates us to even click the shutter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
And I don't know if it's that benign. I mean, bringing back this, so using that as sort of a framework, and then going back to your fascination with wartime photography, I wonder if I actually would posit that imagery from the Vietnam War and Korean War are already politicized. I don't know.
Oh, of course, absolutely. It wouldn't. I mean, technically though, if we got into it, wouldn't every image be politicized?
What this is the thing about one of the main undercurrents I want to explore with these conversations is, photography in general having essentially being a fundamental part of our culture, in the sense that it actually is now defining culture as opposed to observing it. That maybe when it first came out, when the technology is first built, and that first generation, both of the technological sort of innovators, and then the first, we would now consider classic journalists and candid photographers, and then the first wave of, it's probably, coincidentally as well, the first generation of art photographers. So the manipulation of a new technology, there's going to be a lot of naivety and let's call it pure intent. So whether it's, I want to be able to freeze a moment in time, or I want to depict a situation as it is, and all of these ideas of, let's say, reality as it is or could be, I think that's gone. I think it's gone, and I think I offend people when I bring it up that way. And I think this is the thing that worries me a little bit about my personal practice. And I think the first generation of photographers might have had the intent that this medium allows us to see what a tree I'm looking at a tree right now at the window, what a tree really looks like, and the texture of this birch. But what we've learned in the next generations is that it's so easily to manipulate. I mean, never mind the basic thing of angles and exposure and, contrast. But now, with digital manipulation, I can make this birch tree into any tree I want. I can change the scale so that, how many times you see that on Facebook or whatever people are on the internet, like, 4,000-pound shark. And it's like, no, they were just closer to the camera, right? Like,
yeah. It's the same comparison between like digital and film photography, right? Like digital always represents the infinite, like the amount of possibilities that's available with digital. And I mean, like, obviously, like with film photography, if you get a negative scan that's a JPEG or whatever, like as soon as you digitalize it, it's infinite. Like in terms of what you can do, in terms of like, it might as well be infinite, but it's not technically, sure, but it's like, it always looks like you're entering the infinite, right? Like you shoot a scene with a roll of film, you got 36 shots or 12 or whatever, right? But you shoot a scene with digital and you got 32,000, right? Like it's literally like infinity when you look at what we used to have. So I completely agree with you. And like that's the thing with digital, is like it's beautiful because it is everything. It can do everything, right? Like it's all encompassing almost, right? Like in terms of that, like it takes us like that one step closer to perfection. And for me, like I'm a person who's very perfection adverse. I don't want perfection. I love the cracks in the wall. I love the cracks. I like to see beneath the veneer, right? Like I want to see these things, like the decay of just time. I want to see what time does to things. That's one of my primary interests, and I think a lot of that has I'm morbidly obsessed with photographing death in all of its forms, and I think that's because I love seeing things alive, because of that, right? And digital, like it's all lies, but if it's all lies, then it's also the truth. It's where we're going.
My worry about photography in principle, again, without delving into the specifics of analog and digital, is that it's not only manipulatable, easily manipulated, it's easily manipulated can be intentionally so, but it also is illusory in the sense that it's based on an assumption we have of what an image's power is. So when we flip through any image, be it an archival thing from, Ansel and Adams from 1930, whatever, right? Or something created today in a virtual space in a world that doesn't even exist. We still have a basic assumption that our eyes are comprehending something that actually exists. Even in the most artistic and strange sort of manipulation, there's a core, I think, intuitive assumption that what I'm looking at is in some way real, right? And let's say you're out taking photographs for yourself. So outside of commercial work, we're not going to talk about, weddings and making a groom and a bride happy.
How to make the most money in photography. 10 tips.
Lots of stuff like that, right?
Put yourself out there. Yeah.
So we're going out, we're taking pictures. You wanted to initially describe the act of photography as something benign and not emotional. But then I think it becomes deterministic and fatalistic.
So I want to make myself clear there real quick, right?
Sure.
Okay. So in of itself, like the camera does not have a soul. Yes, we can all agree with that. Now, that's not to say they don't have personality. Like I've said to Louis before, I've met cameras with more personality than some of the people I know. But going from there, like you can never free yourself from your soul, right? Like to do so would be dead. You'd be dead. Maybe, who knows? Spirituality, right? So you're never going to be able to actually sever that emotional like tinge on a photograph because you're the one taking it. But the act in of itself, like to become a machine, to become a camera, to become a viewfinder, that's when you're null. Like you're nothing. But then the stimuli happens, like whatever the fuck you're looking at, or you're walking around the street, and the stimuli is you. Right, because that's not going to necessarily appeal to anyone else when you point your lens at it. Like this is how you flavor your lens or your camera, right? So you're never going to be able to actually take that emotional element out of a photograph. It's always there, and it's always you when you're taking it, obviously. Right? And I would even argue when you're the viewer from a photograph, it's the same deal because you're getting stimuli maybe out of this photograph, and that's you as well. The relationship between the viewer and the shooter, or the viewer and the photograph, right? And the audience and the artist, right? But going from there, like in addressing that primary question there, is like there's a couple of things that have changed for me personally about doing this. And the first one is that like you gotta, as cliche as it is, you gotta love to walk. You gotta love to move, and that's the first thing. Right? Like if you can walk, you can photograph. And one of the things that me and my peer groups, specifically Stefan, have been talking about often is like walking as a form of meditation, right? Is probably, or not probably, is one way to photograph, because you walk, you meditate, you take in your surroundings, you listen to the soundtrack of your life, and you keep moving and you take it all in with your eyes, and then stimuli hits you and you steal that moment, you take it. But it's happening because you're meditating, because you're being very conscious of your surroundings, you're looking at things, you're taking it all in, you're listening, right, to the rhythm. And obviously, like, this one's a little bit weird too, because I've done this in multiple different ways, but people, Daido Moriyama, for example, like they're always talking about, like, you got to listen to the rhythm of the street, right? Like what's happening and how where you can get these shots, right? But I mean, I've put earbuds in and just walked around listening to music and taking photographs like that. They're different than if you were to just listen to the street. They're a little bit more focused on probably the mood that you want, right? But there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. But I think it all starts with like learning how to walk as a form of meditation to clear your mind. And this isn't, to say like, there's always this like interpretation of meditation as like telling your mind to shut the fuck up. No, that's not what meditation is. You can't, and obviously meditation's like with an asterisk here because it means something different to literally everyone, right? But to me, telling your mind to shut up is ridiculous. Like, you're constantly, generating thoughts out of some abyss somewhere, and it's running at 1,000,000 miles a minute. Rather than kind of telling your mind to shut up, it's better, in my opinion, what I do is I acknowledge those thoughts, I honor them, I talk to myself about why I'm having these thoughts. Do I like these thoughts? Are these thoughts okay? Like, is this the thoughts that, like, these thoughts, or these emotions and thoughts of things I want to harbor? And a lot of that gets reflected back into what I'm doing with my work, I think. Because it's like, one of the primary things about shooting for me was always, people always telling me, like, the basic crux central piece of advice that everyone always spews at you is like, shoot what you love, right? That's a really easy sentence. It's really easy to identify with, and what started to happen for me was just like, I started to question, like, well, what if I don't love anyone or anything? And I knew that wasn't true. So I started to take pictures of my family, of the people close to me, and I also, like, there was a bit of a crisis there, because it was like, are pictures of my family art? That's ridiculous in my mind. I would say that it's fucking stupid. Like, take a look at these beautiful landscapes. So again, using the photography you mentioned, Ansel Adams, sure, right? Some beautiful street photography by Jerry Winogrand or whatever. Like, you're looking at all these things, you're like, well, my pictures of my family aren't anything. But I mean, like, that's the issue, is like, you're comparing. As soon as you compare, that's death of joy. You can't. There's no point in comparison, nearly. Why compare yourself to others, right? So take and do and photograph when you feel the stimuli, And the other big thing, I guess, that a lot of my peers go through is, like, they feel guilty when they don't pick up a camera for a while, and so there's just guilt, like, you've invested, thousands of dollars into camera equipment and you're not taking any fucking pictures. So what the fuck are you doing? But I mean, for me, it's like, I'm not gonna concern myself with feelings like that. It's like, when, like, and it happens all the time, right? Like, if I'm constantly trying to stay in a meditative state where I'm conscious about what I'm feeling, I'm conscious about what my thoughts are, like, the spark comes. Like, I'll be walking with my grandma, and she's currently, because she has to stay inside all day, she's tending to the garden in the backyard, and there are some beautiful moments there that I can photograph just because I get to hang out with my grandma outside gardening.